I'm not sure how.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me? I cannot hear you. Oh, you're mute.
I'm mute. Sorry.
Hi,
How is
Paul.
it? Hi.
Yeah. Hannibal, I just made you the co-host.
Great.
Can you see it?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. So we're. Hi, guys.
Hello.
I'll just do a few testing. Yeah, can everybody see the images clearly?
Yep.
All right. Hannibal, I got a notification of someone coming in. Can you see that? Oh, hi, Victoria.
Hi, I'm in San Francisco right now.
Nice. It's very sunny.
I'm just gonna change my background screen. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi.
Hi, Iveta.
Hannibal, do you try it if you can allow people in? Oh, they're in. Great. So we'll wait like 2 or 3 more minutes, then we'll start. All right, I think we'll just wait like 2 more minutes, then we'll start. How's everyone doing? Iveda, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you,
Right.
Terry?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys about the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have a Q&A section at the end of this session, but like during the sharing, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Right, there's more people coming in. All right, it's 7:04, so I'm just gonna start. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very happy to see some familiar names from our last event. My name is Carrie Xin Yao. I'm the founder of Time, Art, and Culture nonprofit organization, and I'm very grateful to have the privilege to be the curator of a very timely project, From Body to Body to Bodies, at Canada Far East Art Center. Today, we're also honored to have artist Paul Gilbert, Victoria Catherine Chen, Iveta Sun Kang, and our assistant curator, Hannibal de Pensier. He's here with us. Paul Gilbert focuses her artistic investigation on bodies, including her own as research territories. Her strategies aim to highlight the value of presence, process, structure, and also materiality. Victoria Catherine Chen's work focuses on memory, somatic sensibilities, and the body as a site. Her artistic practices including film, performance, sound art, and also installations. Iveta Sun Kang is an interdisciplinary artist and also a writer. Her practice is concerned with cinematic thinking, video installation, text, and participatory work. Sorry, did anyone want to ask a question? All right. And Hannibal de Pensier is the Assistant Director of Time, Art, and Culture nonprofit organization. He is also the High Curator of the Fridge Store Gallery. So I'm gonna start my share by introducing a few background information about the exhibition ideas. And I'm gonna briefly introduce some of the theoretical roots behind the ideas as well. So the title is taken from Body to Bodies, is taken from the poetic motto of the exhibition Documenta 9th, year 1992, curated by curator Jean Hoyt in a time of crisis. And here is a poster of it. And our team seeks to carry on the curatorial mission of Jean Hoyt to center the corporeal experience that have been radically displaced by the virtual world at the center of public attention. I'm also want to introduce some background story of our poster. When I was doing research, what I find quite interesting is how the poster that made 30 years ago parallels really well of the white swan, black swan theory that has been brought to the fore by this year's presidencies. These are two theories that used to describe the predictabilities and of certain events. The black swan theory is a metaphor that describes an event that comes as a surprise, and it's developed by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And it is based on an ancient saying that black swans does not exist, and it is often used to describe the high profile rare events beyond the realm of normal expectations. The white swan theory is only developed this year by the same author to explain the global pandemic. A white swan event is something certain to occur at some point. Such events are inevitable, or to quote the author, like the pandemic, they come as a result of the structure of the modern world. So when we was designing the poster of the exhibition, we wanted to have something that's referencing both the history, but also the timely concern, especially in regard with the pandemic. But instead of using a real swan, we used a model wearing swan wings. And what's also interesting is that we've been getting a lot of comments that it kind of looked like a bat, which is also very timely. Yeah. And the exhibition itself centers around our bodily experience in such a world, and it seeks to convey a multifaceted corporeal consciousness that exists primarily on affective and relational terms that supplements conventional notions that prioritize the body as a physical entity or a biomedical entity. As illuminated by scholar Ed Cohen, it is more of a modern edition of the body, and that's outlined by our skin, and that needs constant protection by the immune and defense system, but also technologies, which is really something brought to the fore by the daily reminder of washing hands, wearing masks, and keep distance. So the pandemic wave really adds something to that. And what I have here, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to admit some people in. here is an exhibition at the Harvard Art Museum. It's curated by the gallery curator. And here is an exploration of the modern period of artists, and it brings attention to the role of different artists and mediums in producing the modern understanding of the body. What we are trying to do at the exhibition is really hoping to propose alternative ways of understanding. And I really hope the artistic explorations of the body can become either reshape or understanding or comment on the so-called social or modern understanding. The theoretical roots of this show really lies in phenomenology and affect theory. So some of the key scholars would be Simone de Beauvoir, but also Jean-Luc Nancy. I know he asked the same question as one of our artists, Victoria Chen, asked, how do we listen through her work? Yeah, it's really to focus on the idea of affect and or bodily experience. Such ideas really highlights a turn to the lived experience and help us to respect the sensations and unformed ideas in a time like 2020. So in some respect, the exhibition really comes from a rather personal place, and it is in search more of resonance rather than reasons. And I just needed a methodology that allow both philosophical concepts and rational reflections of our present conditions to converge with innate sensations and unformed ideas. So affect theory and phenomenology become quite effective tools for me in that they propose bodies at the sites of encounters, to quote Beauvoir, or relations, to quote Nancy. Thus the body becomes more of a place that bridges subjective experience and the broader social and cultural assumptions. And in the exhibition, we hope to center the corporeal experience and the function as an existential plane between idiosyncratic mutuality and atomized individualism, between shared stories and solitary experiences. This is quite important to me, and I think it's also very timely because it allows us to explore effective relational formations and connections that does not prioritize immune and defense mechanisms. That's my share of the theoretical ideas. I can explain or elaborate more during the discussion. But before that, let's welcome Paul to share her images. Paul, can I start the share of your images?
Maybe I'll just talk a little bit before the first image.
Sure.
I want to, first of all, say good evening to everyone. Once again, I would like to thank Time, Art and Culture and the curators for the invitation to be part of this show. And I would like to thank you, Zin, also for bringing forth the theme of the 9th Documenta 1992. I was not aware of it, and I find it so relevant to what the world has been living. So thank you for that. So because my projects tend to lead to one another, I decided to go back in time a little bit to address one of the branches of projects that lead to the series presented in Body to Body to Bodies exhibition. So the installation, and yeah, you can put the first slide, please.
Yeah, I'm very excited to know more about it. I didn't know much.
Okay, so this is part of an installation entitled Cartographie. It was shown at the FOFA Gallery in January 2019. And the series speak of the relation of the body to time and space through a mapping process. And I will talk here only of a few elements of the installation. In 2017, I began the task of printing each part of my body directly on 2 fragments of handmade paper with ink. Because of the sometimes abstract nature of the prints, I sought a way to keep track of the origin of each impression, because at the beginning of the project, I was not sure where I was going with this project, so I wanted to keep track. So that's at the moment, at this moment, I chose to project a grid over me. So the second slide, please.
Yeah.
So I took I drew a grid. I put it in a projector, projected it on me, and took a picture from the front and a picture from the back. And these images became a system of reference for mapping the paper fragments, which were marked with the coordinates of the grid at the back. So while I could have simply have traced a grid over an image of my body, I reflected on the significance of my decision of doing an actual projection. So the concept of corporeity in relation to space and time has always been central to my research. And I saw in this gesture of projecting the grid an evocation of the expectations of the system over the body in general, over a person's multifaceted identity, but also over my own female body of mature age. So much is contained, constructed, classified, and arbitrary in a colonial, patriarchal, capitalist society. Where do I stand in such a socioeconomic, cultural context? How is it impacting on who I am? So the grid began to feel heavy upon me. I felt like pushing this analogy of an overbearing system by playing with the image. A grid is perceived as a very structured device, giving the impression that it locates a truthful and immovable reality. However, I identified that moving my body within these reference points could refute this so-called reality. For example, I could have recorded that the print of my forearm was a T13, but if I move my arm in relation to the grid, these coordinates would not reflect the new position. Moreover, in the introduction of the grid book, Hannah B. Higgins confirms that the grid are generally far from remaining static as, quote, the materials they contain are in constant state of variation, end of quote. Historically, the architecture space was built in reference to measurements of the human male's body. So inserting my female figure of mature age into the grid prompted a feminist shift from the classical representation of the mensuration of the ideal male body, and became a trigger for claiming and challenging this space of rationality. One of the strategies in this direction was to design and build volumetric shapes. These shapes were comprised of compound angles to confront the grid. They allowed me to shift my position as I stepped onto and off them in front of the grid. So I give an example of these volumetric shapes that I built here on the picture on the right. So I will ask you, Zin, to go to the third slide. As the project evolved, I stopped using the grid, the projected grid in performance. The volumes act as support and obstacle as they force me to negotiate my positioning and my movements. So because, oops, previous. Okay. Because the volumes are coated with charcoal, my objects function as markers and recorders of my actions. This performance was part of the exhibition Ignition 15 at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery. Next slide, please. The following summer, after I did this performance a few times, I encountered the singular geometry and arrangement of the rocks in Port-au-Saumon, here in Quebec, in the Charlevoix region along the St. Lawrence River. To me, it was speaking of motion and of passage of time. So I responded with a performance where I sought to integrate my body into the surroundings, to temporarily become part of it in a non-anthropocentric manner. Or, as I mentioned last week, not as an atomized individual moving within an environment, but rather as something that is coextensive with its surrounding, as expressed by Laura Levine in her book, Performing Grounds. The element of the image allow a superposition of different time scales. I would bring your attention to the corpse of a dead bird in the upper left of the image. There is, of course, my body and the stones and the way the lines are aligned that speak of movement, but at all these elements at very different scales. So because of its tactile and moldable qualities, I then turned to clay to keep developing geometric shapes. Next slide, please. Those shapes are not only confronting the grid, as they did before, but they are now in dialogue with the landscape that I had encountered and the body. I used different clay bodies and modes of firing. I also kept some pieces raw to maintain them in a transitional state with the potential for marking or even to go back to dust. I presented my pieces and the large format photography seen in the previous slide as an installation, and I was inviting the viewer to encounter and navigate through an unexpected and recomposed site. As I explained at the vernissage last week, at this point I felt like involving other bodies into my research. When you were talking about Zin, the body as site of encounter, it makes me think of it as well. So maybe you can move to the next slide. So in January, I started inviting pairs of participants to my studio. I would place slabs of wet clay where their bodies touched each other. I aimed to materialize the intersection, the liminal space where the contact occurred. These stoneware pieces called body maids contain the warmth of the contact as well as the transformation induced by the firing itself. For me, they render an archaeological feel as well as displaying a very organic and mineral, almost bony aspect. Then the pandemic hit and I had to stop this part of the research. So I turned to knitting. The next picture is the one of the installation at the show. So I built a device allowing, I was interested in building a device allowing to feel a body without touching it. So while remaining at the 2-meter distance. So this simply came out as an urgency to act, to deal with a new disturbing reality. During the process of making, I reflected on the gesture of using one thread constantly crisscrossing, and it brought forth the idea of social fabric, its interconnectivity, ideas such as being on the same thread, intersections, etc. I became interested by knitting as a way also of abstractly writing multiple stories, all punctuated by densities and apertures, revealing, hiding, containing flaws, and never finished. I plan to keep exploring ways where it could be brought to its full potential as a performance textile. I'm interested in interacting at distance with other human bodies, but also non-humans, alive and inert, real and imagined. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm definitely very interested in some of your other works. Next, before we have an open discussion, we're gonna welcome Victoria to share something about her work as well.
Yes, I just unmuted myself. Thank you for inviting me to this panel discussion. And also I would like to thank Paul Gilbert for sharing her thought process, which I am very inspired. And it really strikes a chord in me when you mentioned about how you examine the notions of trace and focusing on the reciprocal relationships between being marked and marking. So it's, and also because it's very timely in today's global pandemic crisis, it's about how do you position yourself, how do you also relate with the others, and how do you mark yourself in this day and age of social distancing. So I find it's gonna help me in my own thought process, and I really appreciate the deep research and all the questions that you have brought this evening, Paul. So merci. Yeah, and thank you, Zine, for inviting me. And it's such an honor to participate with a beautiful lineup of artists and collaborators. So thank you very much. And also want to acknowledge that I am situated on unceded territory of Tzohk'jaghe of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, where I'm very grateful where I could live and work and continue to make art. So I would like to start by giving a very brief explanation. As I mentioned last time during the vernissage at the opening. So my sound work consists of a sound installation piece called Your Body Becomes a Speaker. It is a wooden floor transducer capable of inducing vibration through low frequencies and through the human body. And it projects shape and movements of the sound source through the bones and the skin. And therefore, your body becomes and operate like a multi-channel audio speaker. I would like to address some of my questions throughout my project, which I consider a ever-evolving project. My practice is mainly a research-based practice. So some related questions that are guiding in this investigation include: how does a sonic sensibility contribute to accidental choreographic topography and affective or vibrational relationships? And I want to place it in our context here. I find that when every day we move our bodies around in our environment, it's a constant negotiation, and it's also a constant collective cooperation with strangers that are also moving with you. And it's actually, as also Paul mentioned, how she finds a way to mark, right? How do you mark yourself? It's for me a way how working with invisibility, invisible presence, which for me it's mainly with sound practice, brings us to how do we move with different types of energies, with different types of layers that are unseen, and which right now we are dealing with a virus that is invisible, that is, we call it the invisible enemy, really has brought me a lot of more of like concerns, and also more of new explorations, and in this new era right now that we are in. Another questions that I have been really keen of researching is how do soundscapes and rhythms impact dominant ways of listening and thinking through sound, but really more about thinking through sound with our body. How do we use our cells, our skins, our body that is in a way like a shell, and how do we capture those senses, and how do we react, how do we feel, and this is why I tackle listening practice as part of my my way of expressing, and my way of relating and connecting with the others. Another question that I also am right now exploring is what kind of practice is required to decolonize our listening methods in culture, in history, in language, environment, and in perception studies. So recently in my art practice, you can move to the next slide. I would like to show you how this recent exhibition has been very influential in my continuous exploration. So I have been very recently interested in decolonial listening, and also how we are shaping and remaking spaces through decolonial sound and listening. My other focuses in my research is also about sonic methods, like what are the sonic methods to challenge the hierarchy of sounds, and that how in our Western culture, in our context here in North America, how the Western philosophy unconsciously also have influenced a lot in our way of gestures, of interaction, of communicating, of vocally expressing ourselves, and as such, how do we interrelate with each other? How do we interrelate with other bodies that have different body features, that have different, that are composed of different gender types and race and age groups? So really also thinking about the diversity of bodies and in a very unconscious way. So for me, I'm really right now invested in what is being aware, like how to be mindful with our surrounding. And yeah, also I'm very curious about like the subjective listening and the attentiveness of external listening, but also the inner corporal soundscapes, really very much focused on what our body have to offer, and how can we re-explore new ways of engaging with ourselves, different body parts of ourselves, and that also can enable our way of hearing things, but also of listening things. I want to share you two quotes that really stay with me and that I am very inspired of. It's a quote of Pauline Oliveros, a composer and sound artist and author. So the first quote is, "Deep listening is listening to everything all the time, reminding ourselves when we are not, but going below the surface too. It is an active process. It is not passive. I mean, hearing is passive, and the sound waves hinge upon the eardrum. You can do both. You can focus and be receptive to your surroundings. If you're tuned out, then you're not in contact with your surroundings. You have to process what you hear. Hearing and listening are not the same thing." Yeah, those words are so powerful, and they really bring me a lot of to many places in my thoughts. And the second quote I would love to share with you is, "Deep listening is listening in every possible way to everything possible to hear, no matter what you are doing. Such intense listening includes the sounds of daily life, of nature, or one's own thoughts, as well as musical sounds. Deep listening represents a heightened state of awareness and connects to all that there is. And as a composer, I make music through deep listening." So these ideas really nurture in how I feel and how I see the world, and also how I want to connect with the others. You can also move to the next slide. Thank you. And as you see in those documentation photos, you see humans' bodies that are feeling or sensing and also listening differently, but not necessarily with the ear, but with different body parts. And what is really something that I am very focused on right now is this looking for this fine line of interior or inner listening inside you, in the corporality, and this fine line between the exterior environment. So over the past 11 days since the beginning of the exhibition, I really am honored to see the amount of people who participated and who engages with my sound installation. And they shared a lot of their impressions and their feelings and their comments on their listening experience. And it really helped me to continue in my work, and hearing how people are like right now reconsidering how to negotiate in their environment, how they relate with each other, and also finding new ways of touching materialities, touching the untouched right now is one of my preoccupations. But also at the same time, it opens up to so many possibilities, whether it's virtually or physically, or environmentally or culturally. So this I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna leave you with this, but we can continue later on the Q&A discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I find it quite interesting, and I remember you mentioned a lot about receptive of your surroundings during the experience process. Personally, because I experienced your work for a long period of time, and I feel like somehow you have a sense of ritualistic and therapeutic moment. And I find it quite interesting because I think your work also resonant a lot with what Nancy called a resonance chamber. I believe you also mentioned about wanting to have a space kind of like an enclosed space, like for the chamber musics as well, and also the turning off the light, even though we couldn't at the exhibition space. But I find that quite interesting as well.
Thank you. Yeah, this is going to be my next project in my work.
Yeah. We're gonna have one more share before we have a discussion. Iveta, do you want me to go to the next slides?
Yeah, please. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed it listening to Victoria's and Paul's presentations. And I don't think I'll have much to say because I want to be like really, I don't know, like relaxed a bit. This work, Tender Hands, is I started with very casual, just motivations, like because we are always busy, and I'm always busy, and I just didn't want to push myself to create something really big or serious or philosophical in that sense. So that's how I sort of started this work, which is like everyday basis, and you know, it only requires me to write like 6 or 7 sentences every day. But actually, it turns out pretty demanding. But yeah, like, so since this work is an ongoing project, I have no idea how this work will end up. It's evolving, changing, growing itself, and the process of it evolves is really resonating with the circumstantial changes that we're having these days, because you know, like the governmental regulations keep changing based on, you know, like the active cases of COVID-19. Sometimes it eases or sometimes it gets serious. So that in that sense, this work is talking to the current reality. That's how I see it. And that's also because that sort of that process definitely impacts on how I see, how I observe, or how I am treated by the governmental and provincial regulations. Yeah, so I think I'm more like adapting to this work, as well as this work is also adapting to myself. And I think that's how I think we can go next. Yeah, so as you can see right now, there are like the first 50 instructions that I wrote for, I think, 2 months or something. And those instructions are different individually. They have different instruction on its own. And on the video, since I presented some of the presenting instructions for other gallery, I did a Instagram live performance, and that's the video you're seeing in the photo. And on the left, there's like a little table that invite you to write one word that associates with your own hand, or when you think about your own hands or others' hands. So that I think that's sort of participatory aspect, I think. Maybe shall we go next? Yeah, I think I explained it already. So like over, I think what I have been like saying as a process of this work is, I think, the way I see or understand the word biopolitics of body, because it's biopolitics. I think in my own definition, it's very circumstantial, and in that sense, it's pretty relational, like Carrie explained, like how regulations, how politics treat your body or force you to treat your body in some like certain ways, and it's always working vice versa. And that's, you know, that definitely sort of affect the images that you have when you think about your own body. And also, what one thing I sort of realized and learned while processing this project was there is like I think there is a division between, like, when we think about body and spirit, we often treat them as two different things. Because I think, or I believe, or I want to believe that they are body and spirit, or soul or mind. They are one united thing that keeps resonating and communicating one another. But I think we're in the sort of society that's really used to dividing those two notions of body and spirit. So that's why I just subconsciously sort of explored, while like writing these instructions, I saw my body and I treat it as if my body has its own spirit, rather than my body is being attached from my spirit, if that makes sense. Because I think, like, when we divide something, there is always hierarchy followed and underlined. So other than this, like including this work in my general like artistic practice, I think I have been like exploring and experimenting to sort of break down that division between body and mind, and the hierarchy between my body and your body. In that sense, like individuals' bodies they are a collective body, and vice versa. So that's how I understand the politics of our body. Yeah, I think that's pretty much I wanted to sort of say about this work that's presenting at this exhibition. And rather, while sort of preparing for this roundtable, there are 3 questions that came to my mind, which I don't think like those questions need answers, but I would just love to share the questions. Let me. I'll just write the questions in chat. So like the first question that came to my mind while listening to Carrie's presentation at the beginning was, what is corporeal experience for you or for us? Because like I know what corporeal experience by its term, but what is it? That was one thing I was like curious. And the second question was, how would you see and define your own understanding of biopolitical impact on your body? Because I know biopolitics, biopolitical body, those words are pretty, I don't know, sometimes it might be difficult to understand for some people. So I want to sort of break down the difficulty of understanding the word by asking that question. And the third question that came to my mind while listening to Victoria's presentation was, I'm not sure if that question would be relevant to Victoria's work or a presentation, but is a body the content or form? That was the third question that came to my mind.
Yeah, I think these are like very complex questions,
right?
For me, yeah.
True.
Because even like for one question, we have like all the sub questions below that, and we can discuss for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But like in general, from a very personal understanding, the first question, in terms of corporeal experience, I know I mentioned that a lot, especially for my research on phenomenology and affect theories, which also talk about those 2 words a lot, is not necessarily just to focus on the sensational aspect, but like prioritize or the sensations, the unformed, the unexplained aspects of our experience, rather than making sense of it or find reasoning behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be like very simple personal understanding of that terms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, and I'm very aware that those questions are pretty dense, and it's because they don't have answers, I guess. Yeah, but I thought maybe like during those questions would be just a answer, like enough answer, or a sort of representative like questions for that explain how I am going as an artist. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking those questions, Ivana. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I think with regards to the first question, I think one of the great things about this exhibition is each work sort of asks us to consider our corporeal relationship to work in a different way. Paula's work and DR's, who unfortunately can't be with us today, really make us move around the work in a way that really grounds us in the gallery, I find. And then of course, yours, Ivetta's, involves instructions that we can choose to act or not. We can choose which ones we want to act. And then Victoria's, yours is quite literally a sensory, tactile experience. So I think one thing that, to me, this exhibition is trying to put forward is there is no unified, or it's hard to think about a corporeal experience or our bodies as a unified concept. And it's fragmented in different ways depending on how we're relating in a certain moment. And on this note, one way that I think a couple works in the exhibition are putting forth quite radical ideas are yours, Ivetta's, and yours, Victoria's. Both contain a sort of meditative or therapeutic element, which to me feels like quite a radical expansion of the purview of art. And of course, correct me if I'm wrong if this isn't what you're intending. And this said, how might we approach this kind of therapeutic or ameliorative utility as an aesthetic element? And conversely, how can aesthetic objects be co-opted for practical therapeutics? I wonder if either of you have any opinions on that relationship.
Because I think that's a really good question, and I don't think I've been able to come up with like a certain, like precise answers to that kind of question. But not only this work, but also my previous work, I think there is like a sense of therapeutic process that sort of involves with very everyday object or everyday practice. And personally, that's how I feel. That's how I feel, like whenever I feel anxious or depressed, I need some intimacy. And intimacy means that something very familiar and something that's always been existing in your environment, right? So those objects, not only object, but also like, people or conversations that you're used to, that you feel comfortable with, those like intimate moments become therapeutic for myself. And I think that's why I think I subconsciously like chose a Korean children's game, which was sort of converted in my previous video work, as well as for this work. Like there are no the objects that appear in the instructions are always something that you can find in your everyday basis. But I think we often or frequently forget how much it can be therapeutic, although we always have it nearby us. So I wanted to point out that moment, which I would call poetic moment, because I believe poetic and poetry always lives nearby us. I think in this work, probably in my future work as well.
Yeah, I asked Ivetta sort of the same question because I've been following her streaming on IGTV during during the pandemic waves. And I find that even though with the hands and the gestures looks very similarly, like how the WHO would advertise the ways you should probably wash your hands. Like you should do this, use soap, like it contains the same elements, but I find that quite therapeutic. And yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I think I've been thinking that a lot after I talked to you last time. I think it's because of the playfulness, but also because of the intimacy we have with ourselves. And, you know, to look at something really close and to listen, it has a sense of ritualistic experience, even though we could not access to like major museums or cinemas. I feel like during the instructions as I perform those myself, it feels like kind of the same, because you have like an elongated period of time that you focus on one thing. And even though it's something very, very small, and maybe it's important that it's very small so that it's not important. So it does not raise any anxiety at all. I feel that quite interesting. And another point before I forgot, because therapeutic aspect has been something I've been thinking a lot. And during Victoria's share, it also reminded me, because she basically asks this question again, like, how do we listen? To be more precisely, how do we listen through our body? It reminds me of the exploration of the idea of listening in the affect theory brought up by Nancy. And he defines it something to, you know, as quite different from hearing, as Victoria mentioned before. And it is how that different is to put you on the edge of sense making. You know, it's not like first to make sense of the surroundings, but really to pay attention to the sonic details, to the details of the rhythms and like the sound, the voice, like how the human voice or how the surrounding noise can become something music. And yeah, I find that quite interesting as well. I'm gonna let you guys finish this part before, and then I'm gonna share a point about Paul's work as well. Yeah. So if you guys have anything you want to say, I feel like Victoria definitely want to say something after that.
Yes, I do. And thank you, Hannah, for bringing up the question. Very relevant. And I also like Iveta's response on how she relates with therapeutic and also using like daily life objects and then bring it into an art space, a gallery space, and engaging also with the visitors. So I really appreciate the relational aesthetic of Iveta's work. And also listening to Zine's comment about like being on the edge of sense making and also paying attention to the surrounding noise. It actually reflects totally what I am trying to investigate, and also, you know, bringing back to the idea of Hannibal's comment that it's radical. It's radical and that it has this meditative element and therapeutic element. It's maybe because I am longing for a way of looking and researching about therapy, researching about healing in spaces that are in like concrete buildings, in architecture space and environment that could suggest something very institutional, something that is like an establishment. Also a place where often when you go see an exhibition in a art venue, the visitor, they go and they view and they experience, but in a way it's like consuming. Consuming in a sense of, as a gallery goer, you go see a work and you you come with judgment, you come with critiques, you come with excitement, curiosity, and anticipation. And I was researching on what is the average duration of a gallery visitor or a museum visitor. The actual time spent in an artwork is 7 seconds. So when the audience come and see the work and they only spend an average 7 seconds with the work, I find this so deplorable because as you all know, artists spend so much time in making their work and figuring things out, and even just coming to bring their work and install their work in the exhibition location. And in the end, you only get 7 seconds of attention. I wanted to radically push the boundary, and this is why in such setting, I want to really bring people coming in to see my work, and with very few direction, people will remove their shoes and they will have to lay down or sit down and even curl their own body and roll around my wooden surface. So yes, basically I'm asking a lot to my listener or to my my audience. But the reason why, and it's also to respond to the question of Hannibal about aesthetic element, is actually a way to deconstruct a architecture of a gallery space, and also deconstruct our way of consuming and receiving and appreciating artwork. And this is why, for me to defy the 7 second time span or attention span to an artwork is by proposing a durational art piece, is by proposing a work that has no beginning and no end. And therefore I work a lot with drone sound, and I work with frequencies that are actually low frequency because it's something that is often unheard. So I just wanted to propose the idea of this deconstruction and in a radical way to bring the therapy and to bring the meditation in often such environment that is like a public space, right? So exploring this this idea of the intimacy, the idea of a human individual body in a collective space. Yeah, this is the edge that I'm trying to push.
I wanted to say I feel very related to what Victoria said. Yeah, I mean, like that's something that that I've been concerning a lot as an artist, and also as an art lover, you know, like consuming art and like reading about art. So I feel very relevant because not only like my aesthetic of, you know, therapeutic scenes in my work, but also I think that's why I have attempted to sort of embrace this aesthetic or idea of participatory work in my work. You know, not trying to make my audience to stay longer, but more like, because like there was this the other day, like when I was walking in Montreal, the neighborhood was very poor and very sketchy neighborhood. And all of a sudden I got to think that I was like really curious and wondering how many people of this living in this neighborhood have ever visited art galleries. So that's like, I don't want my work to just, you know, end and finish and complete it at art galleries. I want my audience to find something at least within themselves by just like, you know, like trying to following my instructions or trying to engaging with my work. Yeah. So I really thank you, Victoria, for saying so. Yeah.
And I want to thank you, Iveta, for your art and your really strong work. It's important work.
Something I'd like to say, just going back to something you said earlier, Victoria, that your work kind of encourages an incidental choreography, which I found really interesting, especially having been in the gallery quite a bit over the last couple weeks, and seeing how there really is an interesting way that people engage with this exhibition. With Paul's work, for example, people sort of walk around one of the installations and then up and then back, and there's kind of an interesting way that the work encourages people to move around in a dynamic way. And yours, Victoria, it's interesting to see people. It is a bit like a dance, the way especially if there are multiple people on your work. They line it in one way and then they switch and they sit and then they move around. So that's quite an interesting element. I'm sorry, I just wanted to bring that up again, that phrase you said, incidental choreography.
Thank you. I am very curious about how bodies move around, and also about the organization of human bodies within a space, but also that reflects the society.
Right,
And
going back to the biopolitical commentary. Sorry to interrupt, just.
No problem. I must say that biopolitical philosophy or theory and subject matter is something that I don't know very well enough, but I definitely want to go and Google more and read more about it. And so if you have any reference, any of you guys want to share, totally down with finding out more about it.
Yeah, if you're interested, I would recommend it's the term comes from an essay by Foucault, which is quite an interesting essay. I forget the exact title of it, but I could find that and link it in the chat if you're interested.
Great, thank you.
Just speaking of that, it reminds me of this quote I've been reading on the philosophy magazine, something about psychoanalysis. And so I just read it. It remains a fact that anyone with eyes to see cannot deny the constant deployment of biopolitics, from the intervention of biotechnology on domains that were once considered exclusively natural, like birth and death, to bioterrorism, the management of immigrations, or more or less of serious epidemics. All political conflicts today have the relation between politics and biological life at their core. It's just something of various scholars and philosophers talking about and commenting on the current situations. I think it might be part of the essay, The Virtue of the Virus, but I will have to check it. I think 2020, the year really brings the idea of biopolitics to the fore again, because a lot of crises we encountered this year, whether it's about the pandemic, the disease, or it's about the racial conflicts and many things like that, or the crisis that brings attention to the sexuality and gender, and everything has to do with how we perceive the bodies, how that understanding would impact our understanding of the self, but also others. So I felt that's an interesting quote to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to add more, because I also learned about this philosophy and the term biopolitics since the pandemic. And pandemic, like Carrie said, pandemic has, I mean, like biopolitics, for me at least, it's not only about like perception of how you perceive your body or how you understand your body or others' body. It definitely links to the current situation, like where like, for example, pandemic has revealed whose bodies are more precarious, whose bodies are more protected. So that's really strongly connected to politics, like social politics, current society. So like that's how I got more interested in this philosophy. And I'm pretty sure Victoria, it's part of Victoria's interest as well. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick note on that before I forgot. I think biological life really brings to the fore this year. And I think maybe it's not true, but I think when Paul explained the process of making her body-made objects, it reminded me a lot of the 19th century medical documentation of bodies. Like if you have some disease on your skin, and especially with prostitutes or the female body, they would have like they would use like very similar method, you know, to place white clay or ceramics or something. It's sort of modeling process to document the disease, and that sculpture would become part of the medical documentation. And I find that to go back to the modern period is quite interesting, because ideas like the modern documentation is also developed in the late 18th century, and also the ideas like immunity or something that we value so much to this year is only traced back to like 2 centuries ago. Yeah, and like the idea of washing hands is only like brought up like roughly 2 centuries ago. I think it's because a doctor noticed how like women tends to die a lot after give birth, and one of the doctors find that if they wash their hands after delivering one baby, the chance to live will increase like a lot. So that's one understanding of the washing hand habit, how it originated. And yeah, I would like to hear more about the modeling process. I'm curious if it's part of your inspiration, Paul.
Excuse me, the modeling or modeling?
The modeling or the molding, like they would place the white clay to the female body, but also patient body in general.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just that the female body, like it's been very like the doctors are very comfortable with using the female body to represent as a patient. Yeah.
Oh, I find it very interesting. I didn't refer to that history when I decided to start these recordings. To me, they just came naturally as very embodied ways of recording without representing the body. And like the first experience I had, I had learned how to make paper. And when you make paper has memory, you know, where the way it is drying, the way it is folded, it will always go back to that. And that notion of memory really triggered something. And I started molding. I didn't show pictures of those. That was also part of that installation where I had molded hands in action. And so yeah, of course, I think the materiality and the touch that's involved, and that's something that I go to very spontaneously. And yeah, I think that's and the molding, I'm interested in the molding, not so much in the representation, like I did at the beginning with body parts, with paper and all that, but I quickly moved like to molding more as a recording of either a presence or, yeah, especially a presence.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I definitely saw that's sort of relevant, both in terms of practice, but also in terms of what you want to convey through the body-made sculptures. Yeah, so I will try to find the source again. I think it's part of the artistic or art historian research of late 18th century.
Okay.
And yeah, I find it's...
And maybe also what I was interested with the body made is that we often think of making with the hands, which is perfectly fine and relevant, but I find there is also an interest of involving other parts of the body, a bit like in Victoria's piece, to listen with the whole body. I find it's very engaging, and I find it's important to raise awareness around the body and yeah, I before the pandemic, one of my goals was to trigger that awareness in the viewer, you know, in either the positioning of the body of the viewer, but without a direct protocol, I would say. But then when the pandemic hit, I thought, oh my God, all of a sudden everybody is going into that hyper awareness of positioning. So it's sort of shifted my interest. Anyway, it just brought a new angle for that observation. I had a little question for Victoria. I was visiting the show today with Victoria Stanton, and when she saw your piece, she made me aware of a piece by Laurie Anderson. You know the piece, it's called
The Handphone Table.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. So what I find interesting with your piece, as you were talking earlier, is that the whole body is engaged, not only depending on one section, you know. There's more freedom in the positioning. And yeah, that I really appreciate.
Thank you.
And you know about the low frequency that you were talking about, they are known to be calming. It is used already in therapeutic sound therapy to use those frequencies.
Well, thank you for bringing up the reference, Paul. I was researching a lot in depth on Laurie Anderson's sound installation piece, which she created this work like more than 40 years ago.
Yeah,
I really love, yes, I really love her work. I was very influenced by her work, and I read a lot about this piece. I haven't gone there and see the work. Actually, it's traveling around the world, and it's touring in different museums. And as you mentioned, the work of Laurie Anderson is that you are sitting at a table and you use your arms and your elbows, and you listen with inside between your hands, which is really interesting because your hands are like headphones, and it's like your body is a technology, right? In her piece, however, it's a music. So you will listen by sitting and placing your two elbows specifically onto gaps on the surface of a wooden table. And you would listen a sound piece, which is also very beautiful and comforting. And it's kind of like listening to a lullaby internally. The way how I wanted to address this and how I wanted to continue in this dialogue of hearing and listening with our bodies is, as you mentioned, I am inviting everyone to really radically listen and reconsider how to explore listening with their entire bodies, where you could move around and not only listen with your hands, but also with your jaw lines and your knee, your chin, your front head. So it's like awakening new senses of your corporality.
Yeah, the whole body is conductive in that sense, so it's nice to use it. Yeah,
it's conductive, and I am interested in how we are more sensitive and more like paying more attention to very sensitive part of our body that we are not aware of. And as you mentioned in your art practice, that you also explore a lot the liminal space in your work, right?
yeah.
And I totally can, this resonate in my work, because I am also trying to search. I'm longing for this liminal space as much as you are also trying to explore. So I like how each one of us in our artistic experience, we're addressing this liminal space.
Yeah.
And for me, low frequency is like a form of layer of the liminal space.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I was wondering also how you would choose the actual sound that you put in your device. Like, is it something you produce, or?
It's a mix of influence of works from other sound artists who work mainly with drone and low frequency, and then I redesign it, I modify, I change it. It's still like a new practice for me, but I am going to continue go in depth in working with drone and also with noise, and also working with like white noise, for example. But I did spend a lot of time listening alone in different locations. So as part of my research practice, my studio space is not necessarily in a indoor studio space. My way of doing studio practice is going out in the street and listening to even like daily activities, which could be like the sound of the train, the metro's engine.
Yeah.
Or like the sound of the hum underground when you are walking on the street and you have those big I don't know how you call this, but you know when you see those grid and those holes, and you can listen like the sound of hell in a way, underground noises. But also listening to my fridge or listening to my air conditioner. It's paying attention to sounds of things that is spinning, things that is cyclical.
I think it's very anchoring, just to be attentive to those in itself brings you to be totally present and anchored in the space. And yeah.
Absolutely. If you want to explore something very anchoring, I invite you all to go to the metro station Saint-Michel.
No?
One day, if you have time, pass by the Saint-Michel metro, and you could go down and stand on the platform and take time to allow your ears to open to different layers of the frequency. It is, for me, by far the space in Montreal where it has this very like deep sound. It's heavy, so you really have a sense of the weight of the sound, and really a way how you embody low frequency environmentally. Yeah.
Maybe just one little anecdote around sound. In 2016, I had a project where I observed wasps that were living underground, and I had the chance to record them, and I have the soundtrack of the wasps going in, and it's in stereo, and I didn't know at the time that it had that effect even on human being. And when I presented it in a room that's made for sound, anyway, people who were there were really sharing how it had a physical effect, not in the interpretation of the beyond when they knew the wasps were not there, and because sometimes it can trigger fear, but the sound itself was very how did they say it? I forget the words now, but I was surprised how strong their body experience was triggered by that sound. And I thought of it in the spring when the confinement was at its maximum. You know, the city was very, very silent. And I was in the backyard, and at some point, my husband says, "Oh, I think there is a wasp nest around," or we started listening, and in the end, it was not a nest. We have a tree, a pear tree that was in bloom, and it was so full of pollinating insects like wasps and bees and all that, that it was actually humming. You know, like it was such a neat experience because not being in the pandemic, I don't think we would have had the chance to hear them. So anyway, it was very strong.
I really love how you depict and how you tell this moment, the story of a pandemic moment, where I can totally relate, because remember you all that at the beginning in springtime, all the planes, aircraft were grounded, and you, for the first time, listened to urban city soundscape in such like a different and radical way, because you don't hear any more of sound pollution in the sky.
Yeah.
And I bet all of you probably paid attention to the sound of the squirrels that are scratching on the trees, or the birds, hearing the birds in the early morning, early hours, that every hour you would hear a different species of bird singing and voicing out. And whereas you also hear the sound of the wind, like in a way as if the wind were talking. So I like how you talked about the sound in itself of the wasp. It's for me, it's like vibration. It's like nature has its own vibration. Every living being is vibration. Trees and plants and animals and even elements of nature like waters is a form of vibration. And I want to reference you all a book that I have read and that I really, really am so inspired of. It's a book by a sound ecologist. His name is Bernie Krause. I have to find the title of the book. It's called, if I remember, it's called the Animal Symphony Orchestra. I have it in my list, and I'm going to share it with you all in the chat, by sound ecologist Bernie Krause, who is a composer, but he defines himself mostly a sound ecologist. And one of his biggest concern and issue that he is researching, and he's also a scholar, and he wrote many books, and also there was an exhibition about his lifetime work at the Centre Pompidou in Paris a few years ago. He's really addressing right now about the noise pollution, but also the death and the silence of the sound of nature in the greens. So if you go in the green space in the forest, the actual orchestra of nature, of the whole ecosystem, is reduced by, according to his research and his time of like extracting the sound sound samples by doing field recording researches. I think he, in his research, if I'm not wrong, I think he said he observed there's like a reduction of 90% of his research and his sound findings when he began like 40 years ago, that over the past 40 years, he drastically see a big drop of the silence of the whole sonic natural ecosystem. So it's kind of like the disappearance of the orchestra, the animal orchestra. And I think this is very worrying, because when we are addressing climate change, when we talk about climate change in terms of the weather, well, we also could talk about the climate change in terms of like sound pollution, and that you know, like sound is also a form of hygiene that is very important to our natural environment. Could I actually ask a question? Well, I would like to ask a question to Paul. I really liked your presentation earlier at the roundtable when you talked about like mapping process and time and space and corporality, and also about like the woman's female body, and in terms of the menstruation cycle, and when you were addressing about the patriarchy system. I don't have a specific question. I just wanted to share how, wow, it's so so evocative and so touching and so empowering hearing from a woman's voice on how you talk about the body and how do you reclaim it and how do you reappropriate it to your own, you know, your own positionality, to your gender, to your female instinct. And I want to ask you, if you could talk more about, like, when you talked about confronting the grid, beautiful. It's a beautiful artwork that you made in your performance. Yeah, if you could share some more of your thoughts on that.
About the action of confronting it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for sure, I did it in a very physical way, like one that I presented by building objects that would make me move within that grid. For sure, when I would show the grid with the picture of myself, people would think, because of my position, you know, of the Vitruvian man, so to bring that feminist twist to that image. I also actually built a grid out of hand-spun handmade paper, where I did a stop motion animation of a grid collapsing and reforming and collapsing and reforming. So this animation was another way of speaking of the cycle of life, of collapse, that's followed by restructuration, by, it was like on one hand, a way to say, I don't want the grid anymore to structure my life, but at the same time, we're all seeking a certain type of organization. So that's why I had, in the end, presented it as collapsing and reforming. It makes me think of, I was reading at the time The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, and actually I think I can find he defines absurdism as a fundamental conflict between what we want from the universe, whether it be meaning, order, or reason, and what we find in universe, which is formless chaos. And I like his quote when he invites individual to embrace the absurd condition of human existence, while defiantly continuing to explore and search for meaning. So for me, when I did the animation of that grid, I would also wanted to open a window onto that conflict of chaos and order that go hand in hand, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I love how you are bringing this and how you, yeah, like you are collapsing and trying to dismantle the organization and the order.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Since
And
it's
yeah,
yeah,
oh, sorry,
please.
go ahead.
Please finish if you want to say something. It's just if you're finished, one of my friend who really wants to ask out the artist a question, and how can artists and artworks act as agents to reveal new ways of relating the mind and the world by the way of the body? He could not be here because he's on his way to travel to New City. He's a host of the Art Responders student discussion group, where they also host discussion on a monthly basis. And yeah, that's his question. I wonder if any of you have a few words to say about that. I also tapped it in the chat if you.
Oh, okay, yeah, I was going to ask you to repeat it.
Yeah, because it is a bit, yeah. And also, if anyone who wants to ask a question to the artist, they can type it in the chat or raise their hands.
You know, then the answer that comes to my mind might be a bit naive, but it's by making art. You know, for me, it's by following these thread of thought that make me, for me, the making and the being goes before the explanation of how do I do it, you know? So that's what I have to say on that.
It's very nice to hear that, and it's something I can only imagining because I do not have artistic practice myself, but I guess I do feel and be visually and sensationally impacted by artworks before I start to make sense of it. So I guess in a way there's some similarities between making art and experiencing art. Victoria, or do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was like reflecting on this question while Paul was answering. I'm like, that's a very beautiful, important question, and I'm like trying to find a elegant way to answer to that. I would say, yes, my response to the question is like, how can artists act as agents? How can artworks act as agents? For me, it's like creating a space of opportunity. It's to create a world of possibility of the impossible. That's what I'm trying to propose with my form of agency and also with my positionality. You know, like me being a person who was born here and grew up here in Montreal, in Tiohtià:ke. How can I also reclaim the space as an artist, as a woman, as an artist that is from another generation that is different from the previous generation of contemporary artists and modern artists that were there before me. So I feel that I have a responsibility by using also my historical background, my family background, and my upbringing. In other words, my positionality to reveal new ways of relating And I feel like in a way my work has a lot to do with architecture. So I kind of am trying to, in a way, manipulate and being an architect, like manipulate the senses, manipulate the way of relating and connecting. You know, it's the architect of different way of having a mindset or different mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I wonder if like the way you mean by manipulating, does it more close to be like regulating or manufacturing? Just to to understand the word, because you did use like quotation marks.
Right. So when I talk about manipulating, it's more about how I could redesign a space, or how I could redesign and recreate a situation. And this is why, for me, by using the gallery space and I created a vibrating floor, it sounds very minimal and it's very very subtle, and it's not a lot, right? It's very, as I said, very minimalistic. But I think in a way it could speak volume, right? By using minimalism, you can also say a lot, right? And that's why I use a lot with invisible forces, which is for me, in a way, it's the sound. So I use manipulation, not like manipulating that it's a negative way, but it's more about how I could orchestrate things and reorder things and reorganize things with actual structures that are already implemented for many years and centuries, that are very much imposed and written by the system of patriarchy and the system of colonialism, and that has a long history of the settlers, right? It's a settlers philosophy. It's a Western culture. It's a male-dominated system. So I'm finding ways as an artist, and using also my body to reorganize bodies.
Yeah, thank you. Iveta, do you want to add something to the question?
I was really thinking hard to come up with like a good answer, but the question itself is pretty.
It's very complex, right?
Yeah, it's very
like
complex.
Like it just happened to phrase every important words that concerns about the exhibition into one single question.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why like because one thing that sort of came to my mind while reading the question was like, because how revealing works, because revealing something always like requires some observation first of all, and understanding how reality works, like in the reality, and then you'd add something, or you'd find your own alternatives to channel you in the way that you prefer. That's how I understand the process of revealing everything. So I guess that's kind of similar to the way I practice my work. And like Victoria said, sort of I've attempted to sort of create a scene that resembled to the reality we're living, and that could sort of reveal some struggles that we always have but often forget. And then I'll add some like imaginative assets, so that my work and myself could somehow act as an agent to sort of propose something not totally new, but new in a way. And that's how I understand what fiction is as well. yeah, that was the thing I was like thinking in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a quick note, like what during your share, I sort of began to think about the question myself, and like how we perceive artworks, and it remind me of a scholar, Susan Kozo, a scholar on phenomenology, and I will type her name in the. She's a scholar that explores performance art and also modern dancing. And she has a phrase, oh, that's so cute. Yeah, she has a phrase of describing artworks or the performances as embodied imaginaries or embodied imaginations, and find that yeah, that could be an answer to the question, because phenomenology also perceive the human beings as embodied and sometimes embodied sexual beings. Yeah. So just want to add that. And yeah, Victoria just shared something. I will also share. Does anyone else has like more questions? Because we are almost somehow close to 2 hours. If you have like any urgent questions, now's the time to ask them. If not, I think we're just gonna wrap up, because I don't want to like overwhelm everybody. And oh, Adele's here. Yeah.
Since we have like 13 attendees here, I'd love to hear some questions if there are.
Yeah.
Adele.
Thank you for 3 artists, like your interesting explanation of your artworks, and it's really interesting to hear like you guys chatting about like the definition of like biopolitics and different understanding of the body. I just want to quickly reply to like Beta's question like early on in the panel, which is about, I think, if I remember it correctly, is that your question about is body the content or form. I personally think you don't have to like, I think body is both. Like there's not like a black and white definition for it. I think for me, body is a content in a like corporeal form, in which like I think it's pretty related to Veta's artworks, which like you explore the practice of writing, and writing itself is sort of connecting between your mind and your body, and it transfer what you're thinking like subconsciously into like actual form on the paper. And like through that, body is kind of like a tool that you use to express like how you feel like inside. Yeah, I feel like this is just to position between like a fantasy, more like a surrealism, and like what actually happening in the reality as you're experiencing. And the relationship between corporal experience and body as a form is like really interpreted through also Pal's like the white clay and your like knitting work, because you trace the body in appearance, you trace the body, but I feel like there's like because there's like a space you leave it out, that feel like we can understand body in like a more like a deeper way. I'm not sure if that like explaining well, but like that's how I feel when I saw your work, which is very impressive. And also like your interpretation of like there's like tears and knot in your like knitting work. That reminds me of like if there's like damage to your body, like, you know, like you cut yourself or like bleeding, that's also like kind of connect to your like emotional kind of reaction to what happened to your body. Yeah, so I feel like that's very relevant. Like if yourself is kind of depressed, you might do some harm to your body, and your body actually reflected like what you actually experience both emotionally and physically. And lastly, I want to say like thank you, like Victoria, for creating those very engaging and participatory like installation. I just came into the exhibition today, and I'm like so excited to try it on. And then when I first sit on the wooden floor, I was surprised that I didn't hear anything. And then you explain in this panel that like it like you incorporate like a low frequency of the sound. So so when I was like wondering why I'm like not like feeling anything, like there's this like a moment of like silence sort of, but just because that moment of like nothingness, I start to like really focus inside, like what's actually I'm thinking at the moment in my body. And then the frequencies start getting louder, and like I really enjoy like that kind of experience that you reconnect to your body, and then you kind of like you zoom inside, and then you like kind of open up your sense to like your surroundings. So like that's kind of like a process. Yeah. So thank you guys so much. I just want to share some of my experience interacting with your work, and thank you for sharing. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, the word that came, oh, sorry, Iveta, you wanted to talk? No. Actually, when the person who just spoke, hearing her at the beginning, the word that came to mind was porosity. And when Iveta, you asked, is the body the content or form? Also, I was thinking, I think Zin, you brought it up last week. How did you say it? That the Chinese consider the body as a porous.
Yeah, as a porous entity.
So it made me think that when I think of porosity, I think of the possibility of percolation from the inside to the outside and from the outside to the inside. And the week before with that, I had written a little poem about percolation. So I know we don't have much time, but if you want, I could read my little poem on percolation that I took out here. It's in French. I'll read slowly. Percolation, it's in French. Percolation des mots à travers le corps. Percolation du corps à travers les mots. Infusion ou effusion. Percolation des électrolytes à travers la membrane cellulaire. Percolation du sentiment amoureux à travers la porosité de la peau. Passage ou digue. Physicalité de locution, diffusant lentement, comme un souffle, une évaporation, une libération. Efflorescence ou effleurement, une percolation sans pression, à froid, à nu. Buée dans le miroir, bulle de savon percolant de l'intérieur, montant à la surface. Condensation et absorption. Percolation millénaire oubliée.
Merci, Paul. C'est très touchant. Tu m'as transporté avec tes mots. I was saying I was very, very grateful to hear her poem, and that her words transported me to other places and imaginaries.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand the poem. Does it have like an English version of it that can be shared?
I didn't do an official translation, but maybe I can roughly say what it is about. You know, percolation of words through the body, percolation of the body through words, infusion or effusion, question mark, percolation of electrolytes through the cell membrane, percolation of the feeling of love. Anyway, it doesn't sound as nice, but that's what it means, through the porosity of the skin. Passage or dike, physicality of speech, slowly diffusing like a breath, evaporation, a liberation. Efflorescence or touch, percolation without pressure. I have to work on the translation, but cold, bare, fog in the mirror, bubbles percolating from the inside, emerging, condensation and absorption, forgotten millennial percolation.
Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. The original version in French is definitely going to be, much more. Yeah, but just listen to that. The rhythm of it is already like very touching to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone else has like any further comment or questions?
Just want to say thank you so much for sharing the poem. It was very beautiful, even though I don't understand French, but like the rhythm and the sonic effect really resonate. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We are at the end of our 2-hour limit. So if anyone have any pressing questions, now it's the time to ask them. If not, I would like to thank everyone for joining us. I know some of the participants left after an hour. I really, I want to say thank you to those who have stayed to the end. And I want to thank for all the artists for their beautiful sharings. And it's very nice to hear about the thoughts and ideas, you know, like the formation of the ideas and the artwork, like how the exploration goes. I just really enjoyed it. And thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. And I hope everyone have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
It was a lovely discussion. Thank you to you both, Shin and Hannibal, to have organized this really well-researched and well-planned discussion table. Thank you to you both.
Yeah, thanks for everyone. And personally, I really believe it's a very productive conversation. I learned a lot. Like, look at the list of sharing. We have lots of stuff there. I have to go through tomorrow. Yeah. So yeah, it's very productive, but also very lovely.
I love the questions that were being addressed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I love the questions. I also love the questions Iveta draft in such a short amount of time. Yeah, it's like all the 3 questions are very hard to answer, but it's very nice to start thinking about them.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, those kind of questions do not need any answers, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Hani.
And thank you, Iveta, for asking those questions in the beginning. The third one, the last one about the form and the body, wow, is it's something I will be meditating on, and also thinking about Zin's reference to in Chinese philosophy and Chinese thinking about porosity as an entity, porous bodies. Also, it's something that I would like to continue to explore in my sensitivities.
Yeah, for the third question, because while I was writing like questions and answers what I was gonna say, there was I realized there was one quotation that I had written down on my notebook, and it's a quotation from Tolstoy, and he said, "Freedom is the content, necessity is the form." So I got inspired by the quotation to come up with the third question. Yeah.
That's a very nice phrase. I love it.
Yeah. It's really nice and feel really happy to see like some familiar faces and names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this beautiful discussion. It's
Yeah.
very very soothing, and it helps me to keep opening new thoughts and ideas now.
Yeah, I didn't like bring much about what we talked about last time about the powers in the solid form. I mentioned I did mention it, but from the sharing of the 19th century art exhibition at Harvard Art Museum, you can see like how their representation really emphasize the outline of skins and the hard contour of the body, and also trying to emphasize that. So the artistic form is really parallels the understanding of the body. And I will not go into that because it's a really really large project. Perhaps I can talk about more next time.
Can I? Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, real quick, I just wanted to, bring a full circle with Jin mentioning about referencing about the Documenta, the exhibition of the 1992. I don't think I have heard of this specific event of this Documenta event, but I will definitely read more about it and also revisit this time and revisit this exhibition, but with a view of the future, right? It's like seeing things critically with a view from a pandemic crisis. Yeah, this is what I will be doing afterwards. Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really something worth looking into. It's one of the largest exhibition in history, and also born in a time of crisis with the bombing, but also like the AIDS. Oh, here's the TD again. Yeah. So yeah.
I was gonna say, because since our official roundtable has ended, I was gonna ask how Carrie, you are feeling about the exhibition that's heading toward the end.
I feel like the feelings towards the exhibition, the artworks, somehow, is it he or she? Is so cute. Yeah, just personally, I feel like I began to have different feelings to each artwork because of how much time I spent in the art space. Yeah, and I feel it's quite interesting. I would like to talk to all the artists more after the exhibition, because after you experience the artwork again and again and again, you start to notice something different each time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I've been really enjoying that.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask you, how does your body feel after this whole experience so far?
It's really complex, but I would just say I always become more aware of my body. like the senses, like the parts of my body, like the hands or the feet after, you know, after experiencing your work. I'm more aware of my feet because I have to like be very careful not to step on it, but more like to sit on it or lying on it. So yeah, but also like the sensational aspect as well.
Mhm.
Wow, thank you. Well, definitely the artworks of all the artists have inspired me in so many ways. And I am also navigating outside when I go out and I see other human bodies. I am like also trying to view things from tender hands, for example, from Ivetta's work, and also from Paul's work about how she works with materiality and the body and all these liminal spaces and the idea of touch alongside with other people's work. So it's like it's a beautiful gift for me to have this experience together.
Yeah. All right. My computer is really dying, so I think this should be end of it, or it's gonna end like in 1 or 2 minutes because it's only 1% right now. Yeah. So yeah. So I'll just say good night to everyone, just in case you lose me accidentally.
So thank you for everything. It was very, very nourishing. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.